This is Will Friedle, the voice of the future Dark Knight, Batman Beyond, and you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app. And remember a few things. First, Dana deserves better. And second, I am Batman.
In the year 2039, Gotham City has no heroes. Its people, no hope. Its youth, no future.
Evening, boys and girls. Who's up for some laughs?
Terry McGinnis was part of the problem.
Freeze right there.
You can't control your temper, and you'd better if you expect to get anywhere in life.
Yeah, I'll be a big success, just like you.
Until a moment of violence brought him to the door of a man named Bruce Wayne.
Let's put a smile on his face.
Leave him alone. Once known as the Batman.
Man, you're something. You okay?
Now, the Dark Knight will rise again to drive the shadow of evil from the streets of Gotham. Let's go! Supervillains, beware! There's a new Batman in town. Batman Beyond. You're pretty strong for some clown who thinks he's Batman. I am Batman. Justice returns to Gotham. Welcome to my world.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 173 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal. Along with me for the ride, as he has been every single edition of this fine podcast, is my good friend, good brother, and the man that runs our Twitter page. It is Liam. Liam, welcome to episode 173 of the DCAU Review.
That's right, and as we have been talking about, we talked about it at the end of the show last week, we've been talking about it all week on our social media platforms. We are trying something a little bit different this week. As opposed to picking an episode of a classic DCAU cartoon and reviewing it with our normal scoring system, this week we're actually going to do a little bit of a little bit more focused thing, and we're going to look at a single character and kind of their entire DCAU history. That being said, we're for now at least we're really going to focus on characters that we've kind of finished with, and since we're still making our way through Batman the Animated Series, Superman, Justice League Unlimited, Batman Beyond, Static Shock, that we will be pretty choosy with who gets these episodes early on. And also because once you get to the bigger characters, it becomes a lot more work, if we're being honest. But that is all of that to say, this is our first DCAU character spotlight episode, and we are focusing on none other than Derek Powers, aka Blight.
That's right. A man who, quite frankly, doesn't even need a spotlight because he glows in the dark. That being adversary. That was good. Come on, yeah. Let's please clap.
Good.
He, definitely. I think, as we're doing research and as we have said before, as we've actually covered each and every episode featuring him thus far, because he really, despite being such a large looming presence and such a pivotal character in the entire series of Batman Beyond, which granted we have not covered yet, all of those episodes, but we have finished the story arc of Derek Powers' Blight because they wrap it up in the first season. So he is sadly no more after his final appearance, as we'll go through here in just a moment, talking about him, Liam. But he is a very, very pivotal character to Terry McGinnis and Batman's story arc from Batman Beyond for multiple reasons, just because of he's really woven into the fabric of not only Terry's origin story and being responsible for the death of Terry's father, which sort of leads to the interaction eventually that he has with Bruce Wayne and becoming Batman. And so it is sort of responsible for Batman's rebirth, if you will, but also he's interwoven throughout many episodes in that very first season, kind of pulling strings behind the scenes, having these constant clashes with Bruce Wayne as being the head of the Wayne Powers organization, and sort of Bruce not trusting him and knowing what a sleazeball he is, and them sort of butting heads. So there's a lot that we get very early on there, and even in a few tie-in comics, we get some Blight appearances too that we'll talk about a little bit later on here. But as far as pivotal arch enemies, I think when people that are in the know think of Batman Beyond's arch enemies, you got to talk about Blight.
Yeah, and I think it's always the character who, I think, when the rivalry feels the most personal, that is when that's the one who sort of ascends to that arch enemy status. It's why there's a Lex Luthor for Superman, a Joker for Batman, and in this case a Blight for Batman, for Terry's Batman. In the sense that, as you said, he is so interwoven into the origins of the character. It's he is responsible. He sort of puts a hit out on Terry's father, that sends Terry on the path to becoming Batman.
I asked you here, Warren, to clear up any misconceptions you might have gotten from that incident with Mr. Tully. Harry simply suffered an allergic reaction to a chemical compound in the lab. Shook him up a bit, but he's under the best of care.
That's great. When can I see him?
Monday morning, first thing.
Thank you, Mr. Powers.
Don't mention it, Warren. Oh, Warren. Before I forget, there seems to be a file missing from Harry's records. Would you know where it is?
No, sir, I have no idea.
No, of course not. Mr. Fix, any word on the kid?
Not yet, but they're looking.
I don't have to tell you how important this deal is to Wayne Powers. It's going to open up the entire Eastern Bloc for us, so I don't need it spoiled by a snot-nosed punk.
I took care of his old man, didn't I?
And it's a little like, and this is a really silly idea, no one would ever do this, but can you imagine if, like, I don't know, I'm just going to throw out an example. The Sandman killed Uncle Ben in Spider-Man. Wouldn't that be... You would think that wouldn't work and it would be a terrible idea, but no, they would never do anything like that, thankfully. But anyway, but it is sort of that thing where, yes, it's the Uncle Ben moment. It's the crime alley Bruce Wayne's parents are killed moment for Terry that is sort of all set off and being orchestrated, though he's not the man who pulls the trigger, so to speak. He is the man who sends the loaded gun to the man who does kill Terry's father. And unlike the man, Mr. Fix, who Terry gets to face off with in the very first episode of Batman Beyond, it's a longer and sort of slower burn. And at least at first, before we are made aware that Terry is made aware that Blight and Powers are one and the same, Derek Powers, much like Lex Luthor, in Superman the Animated Series, is quite untouchable to Batman and to Terry. And so that sort of adds to the sting of knowing that he is the man responsible for, the worst thing that's ever happened to you, and knowing that there's not much you can do about it. So it really gets to that deeply personal rivalry that I think and that's why I think Blight sort of stands above the rest, despite, as you pointed out, not really having that much staying power as far as the multiple seasons go.
Absolutely. And this is a character, it not only, I would say, does his story arc, and in a second we'll talk a little bit about the origins of the character and sort of the history of him, but visually, this is a character that was designed to really stand out on a series where everything is very dark. It was intentionally made darker. The tone of the show was supposed to be darker, so there's not as much bright neon colors. There's not as much Joker action. There's a lot of monotone, sort of mellower, darker, deeper colors that are featured in the palette for Batman Beyond. And then you have just arch nemesis is literally the complete opposite of Batman. Batman has this dark black, almost completely shadow-like costume, and his arch nemesis for this story arc is the complete opposite, this day-glow bright green nuclear man who sticks out like a sore thumb and literally has to continually sort of cover himself with his artificial skin to prevent from standing out in such a great way. I think the character design for Blight, which we'll talk about in a second, sort of some of the influence that it came from, is another thing that stands out and makes this character such an interesting visual piece. And we talk about visuals so much in our reviews that I think it's important that we talk about visually. It's a pretty cool looking character.
Oh, 100%. And it's not an overly busy design either. It's he's in a jacket and slacks, and it's just a skeleton, right? You wouldn't think it would be that visually exciting, but and we'll get to his sort of individual episode appearances. But when Blight first appears in the series, and certainly when he first faces off with Batman in the series, it is so striking their interactions in this bright green, the way he sort of weaponizes this radiation that permeates his whole body in a really unique way that makes him a really cool foil for Batman physically as well. But it's something, and we'll get into this in his origins. It's like part he is this sort of corporate psycho along the lines of a Lex Luthor or a Norman Osborn, but he's also also has the look of a horror movie villain. Like he's very vicious and terrifying as well. It's a really interesting design, and again, not overly complicated. It's just that bright hue of green, as you said, sort of contrasting the simplicity and the simple perfection that is that Batman Beyond suit when they go toe to toe. It's really striking.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's another reason why I think he's incredibly memorable, is just as a child, you see that bright green man sticking out on your television screen. It's kind of, pun intended, burns itself into your memory, I think, at that point. So so let's briefly talk a little bit about the character itself. So this is an original character for this series that has a little bit of inspiration from existing characters. As you mentioned, there's certainly some Lex Luthor puppet puppet masters pulling the strings type influence, being a similar in the vein of the way that Lex Luthor was in Superman the Animated Series. So there's definitely some influence there. Looks wise, though, his look, the skeleton, the nuclear man type look, was actually borrowed from an existing member of the standard continuity Batman's Rogues Gallery, a villain that was created in 1977 by Steve Englehart, the same creator who's responsible actually for creating Star-Lord and some of the other Guardians of the Galaxy. He actually had done some early work on the Batman movie that eventually became, of course, the inspiration ultimately for Batman the Animated Series. So there's some interesting DCAU, certainly some 6 degrees of DCAU separation there, I guess, that you could tie him back to. But this character, Dr. Phosphorus, who was created by Steve Englehart, had a similar look. At least he was this Burning Man. He was a scientist. It was not a one-to-one. It was more of an adaptation of his look versus the actual character itself. But I think the creators, when designers and people, artists have been talking about, what their original inspiration for this was. Bruce Timm and maybe Alan Burnett talking about that this was something that they borrowed from. But with that, I think that it's very hard not to look at the character and also see, as we've talked about several times, that there's some heavy influence from the world of Spider-Man in this character as well.
Absolutely. And yeah, as we've touched on, that Norman Osborn Green Goblin character is obviously one of the tippy top Spider-Man rogues, for, again, the same reasons we've been talking about, the sort of deeply personal feud that those characters have had over the years, and sort of the unique villainy of that character, and how he is such a foil for Spider-Man. So yeah, there's definitely that, obviously a little bit of in DC world. You could obviously compare him to Lex Luthor because of the evil corporate side of things, but obviously this series, Batman Beyond as a whole, when Glenn Murakami, who of course was made a producer for the first time on this series, that was that was one of his main goals, I think, was to really model Terry and the whole series after that early Steve Ditko Spider-Man stuff, and certainly giving him a nemesis who is both a powerful physical threat and that also happens to be a corporate titan in his day job. That was certainly no coincidence.
Absolutely. So, this is a character, again, whose story starts and ends with the DCAU. We'll touch a little bit later on how he's made his way into main continuity DC Comics. But let's start talking about his actual DCAU story arc, Liam. As we said, it's only the 7 episodes that he really plays a part in, which is crazy to think. But then you remember that first season of Batman Beyond is only 13 episodes. But as we said, he really makes a splash and is cleared to be the main focus. As we learn, he's mentioned, Derek Powers himself has mentioned pretty much right in the first scene of Rebirth, as they mention this merging of Wayne Powers into a single organization between the two of them. And then right after that, we're introduced, to Terry's father being somebody that's working in this laboratory on his behalf. So he really is established early on in Rebirth as a very, very important character. And of course, I think there are several standout moments in that episode. What would be your standout if you had to pick out a scene out of Rebirth that really you feel like defines that character? What would be your pick?
Yeah, I think the first moment definitely comes in early in Rebirth Part 2 when he and Mr. Fix confront Terry as Terry is walking home and ask him about a disc that Terry's father gave him and told him to hide and keep safe. That sort of really, I think, puts up front that prior to the dramatic transformation and everything, which certainly seems to drive him a bit more mad as the series goes on. But it's really made very clear very early on that he is very comfortable and feels very untouchable and is willing to sort of threaten Terry and threaten a kid in the middle of the street, in broad daylight. He just has this really dramatic corporate slime.
Hello, Terry. Ever had a ride in a limo?
My dad always told me to never take rides from strangers.
Who's a stranger? Besides, your dad's not around anymore. Be smart, Terry. Get in.
I'll pass. Let go of me! What are you doing? You some kind of sicko? Help! Help!
That won't do you any good, Terry. Why don't you make it easy on yourself and give me back my disc?
What disc?
You know what I'm talking about.
All right. If he lets go.
To him, and it really comes out. Comes out in that scene, and I think the final moments of the episode when we get our first reveal of Blight would also obviously have to come into play here.
Yeah, absolutely. When we get the final reveal of what this gas that he was exposed to and what we initially maybe think that he succumbed to and potentially passed away from, we learn at the end that the only way to treat this toxic, poisonous gas and virus that has been released and he's been affected by is to treat it with extreme radiation, and he has a reaction to it based on the radiation, and we get this sort of pan up, and it's not all that different than some of the other tragic reveals that you see in Batman the Animated Series, be it a Two-Face or maybe a Clayface reveal. But what makes this different is that he really, really embraces the maniacal evil bad guy at this point, because it's a reveal into the mirror and a complete and total head back and laugh situation, sort of crazily, as he begins to see just kind of the monster that he's become. So yeah, both of those I think are really set the table, not only for who he is character wise, deep down what his character is, but also then the crazy side of things that reveal that maybe this radiation exposure to this gas is messed with his brain further than he expected it to. So moving on from there, his next appearance, believe it or not, is going to be in the very next episode that comes in order, which is so we covered Rebirth, by the way, back on episode 26 of the DCAU review. You can check out all of these episodes that we're going to mention, that we've covered them in the archives at DCAUreview.com or streaming on your favorite podcast app. Also available on YouTube through the Pod Tower. So go back and listen to these if you're interested in it. Some of these we gave higher scores than others. Rebirth, I gave it a 32 out of 40. Liam gave it a 31 out of 40. So, pretty high on the scale there of enjoyability, being the debut episode. His next appearance would be in Blackout, which is, of course, Liam, the Ink episode. And that one is a very fun episode for a lot of reasons, mostly because of the Ink storyline. Again, this episode features a lot of Derek Powers in the background, sort of pulling the strings as he's hired Ink to sabotage Foxteca, which is a rival company owned by Lucius Fox Jr. that's sort of rivaling Wayne Powers. So he's hired Ink as a saboteur to come in and destroy research and sabotage them. And then eventually recognizes and realizes after he has this interaction with Bruce Wayne, which to me, I think is the highlight of the episode, is we really get to see Bruce and Derek Powers go head to head for their very first time, as Bruce kind of lets him know that, hey, I know you're not a good person and I'm not going to let you get away with it.
Come in, Bruce. What a pleasant surprise. How have you been holding up?
With a cane.
Very clever. I must say, it's so nice to see you taking an interest after all these years. We're lucky to have you as a resource.
Mm-hmm.
You should come by more often. I'll set you up with the finest office in the building. Just not this one. I'd prefer you not touch that.
In case you're worried, I didn't come here to set up shop again.
Why, Bruce, you've misread me. I don't worry.
I just came to say this. Keep your hands off Foxteca.
Pardon me?
I may not have the leverage on paper anymore, but I still have friends. The Foxes were a valued part of this company for years. I'd hate to find out Wayne Powers was involved in these attacks.
Bruce, let me put your concerns to rest. I'd never do such a thing. Why, Lucius Jr. was still vice president when I took over.
I know. You fired him.
Yeah, that is sort of an interesting dichotomy that we see throughout the rest of the season, is that Powers does sort of have that rivalry, not just with Batman as Terry, but also there is this sort of thing where he muscled in on Bruce's company, and Bruce is now sort of having his life revitalized, his ability to care about not only the city itself, but his company in particular. How important that sort of becomes to Bruce for the rest of the season, and you see that rivalry, that he's made enemies of both of the Batmen by pretty early on in the series.
Yeah, so we do get a little bit of the reveal as Derek Powers realizes that Bruce is going to be a difficult adversary, as well as Batman continuing to meddle into things. So Ink decides that she's going to set out on this path to try and kill Batman specifically. And that's where she finds her way into the Batcave. A very memorable episode. You and I both loved that episode. I gave it a 36 out of 40. You gave it a 35 out of 40. So pretty high scores for that one as well. Mm-hmm. So I think the best parts of that, as far as Blight are concerned, though, are sort of revealing how he's sort of we already knew he was ruthless, but this really sinks it in that he doesn't care who it is, whether if they're standing in his way, he will do whatever it takes. And he even has this interaction with Ink where he tells her he doesn't care what it's going to cost. He needs Batman gone. So this is sort of a reveal of that ruthless character, that ruthless nature of his. And I think does a great job of showcasing that. So we move forward again, one episode later in maybe one of my favorite Batman Beyond episodes of all time. And that is the episode Meltdown, Liam. And this is where we finally get the official reveal and the first battle between Batman and Blight himself.
Yeah, that episode is it's an all-time classic. It's obviously because it also features the return and sort of the finale of this long-standing Mr. Freeze story arc that starts in the original Batman the Animated Series. But as you mentioned, Cal, it also features the true sort of first action that we see Blight take as a character. He's sort of, as Derek Powers is manipulating Victor Freeze throughout the episode, and eventually decides that he's going to just kill Victor Freeze. The experiment they were working on with him just isn't working, and so instead he's going to just scrap it and start over. And when Victor Freeze looks to take revenge and freezes him in an ice block, as he does, that leads to the debut, the first meeting of Blight and Batman. Not only does he attack and nearly kill Mr. Freeze very, very quickly, he also then has a sort of a battle with Batman, and it's very clear as we talked about earlier when we were mentioning the visuals. Not only is he sort of just this walking radiation farm, but he also has the ability to sort of throws sort of radioactive bombs all around. He has long range weaponry. He's this incredibly powerful character, and Batman's really not equipped at all to handle it. And it's really only when Mr. Freeze comes back and intervenes on Batman's behalf that Blight isn't able to kill him in their first meeting. So you really establish right off the bat in that episode how ruthless, how vicious he is. Not only again, but on the side of how he uses people in the corporate world, and how he was willing to sort of write off Victor as just a failed experiment, but also how physically violent and physically ruthless he is when he is battling both Freeze and Batman in that episode. Yeah,
and we actually get the first official. He refers to himself as Blight. He gives himself, he coins his own nickname. I don't think you can give yourself your own nickname in most cases. Like that kind of goes against the rules of nicknaming, but he did it. He delivers a very passionate, memorable line.
And behold, I shall be a blight upon the land, and everything I touch shall wither and die. Batman.
And who are you, Sunshine?
Blight will do.
Terry, there's something hot in that room.
No kidding.
And it's delivered with just a great delivery. We'll talk about that in a little bit as we talk about the voice acting that we get throughout this series for Blight and Derek Powers. But a great delivery there, and Batman asks him who he is, and he says, "You can call me Blight." And we're kind of off to the races at that point, again revealing just kind of what a foe he is, and what a threat he is to Batman, and really any interaction that they have is going to be one that Terry is going to be threatened by. This isn't something to lay down and tie somebody up with a rope, as we learn very, very quickly throughout that initial fight there. So the next episode we see him in again, and that last episode, Meltdown, you can check out in the archives. It's episode 28. I gave a score of 35 out of 40. You gave it a 38 out of 40, which means that episode is in the top picks section officially. So definitely check that one out if you haven't. Listen to our review in the archives. Episode 29 is Shriek. And that one, Liam, is another one I think that focuses, while it's not there's not a Blight appearance or a major interaction between Batman and Blight, Derek Powers heavily is featured in this episode as somebody who is attempting to sort of tear down old Gotham in an attempt to move in and make Wayne Powers a lot of money. He's butting heads once again, wouldn't you know it, with Bruce Wayne in the boardroom. And this leads him to decide that, hey, I've done enough butting heads with this old man that used to run this company, and I need him out of the picture.
Yeah, and again, we talked about his interactions with Inc., his interactions with Mr. Freeze, and now his interactions with Shriek. So there is that puppet master quality of a Lex Luthor to him, where again, his as we'll talk about in a moment here as we get to his final appearance, his physical interactions with Batman were few and far between, but he appeared to sort of to pull the strings, so to speak, multiple other times. And yeah, he uses Shriek's incredible sound technology to first to try to physically kill Bruce Wayne. When that doesn't work, to sort of drive Bruce Wayne mad by sort of making him think he's hearing voices. It's a very intricate and over the top plot, but it leads to a tremendous finale there and a really fun moment for Terry. But yes, having Shriek or having Derek Powers sort of pulling the strings there. And I think the standout scene from Derek Powers' perspective in that episode is when Shriek sort of comes to him furious, and he realizes that he's kind of been had and that his identity is going to be exposed, and he doesn't know who, he won't be able to go anywhere, he won't be able to use his own name, and Derek Powers very calmly tells him that if you can't use your old name, then we'll think of a new one for you.
The police know about me. I'm a wanted man. I can never go back to my lab again, and it's all your fault.
That's not going to help.
No, but it'll make me feel better.
You should be feeling fine anyway.
And why is that?
Because your costume gives you power. Real power. Ever had that before?
No, not really.
It's no small thing. Trust me.
But I can't show my face anymore, or use my name.
The face is no loss, and if you miss your name, I'll give you another one that fits your new persona. Shriek.
Shriek?
Not a friendly name, I grant you, but take it from me. It's better to be feared than loved.
Shriek.
Now go forth and do damage, but don't forget, you still owe me Bruce Wayne.
What if Batman gets into it again?
Kill him.
Yeah, he's just full of all these great monikers for these supervillains. It's a shame that he really was eliminated early on in the first episode. Or in the first season, he could have really lent Batman a hand towards the end of the series, naming some of these villains that he comes in contact with. But yeah, he isn't. He's very dismissive, and it's very clear that he's using Shreve in order to his research, and is very dismissive of the use of his research, and has sort of allowed him to sort of make this bed that kind of leaves him needing Derek Powers at this point, because he spends all of this money that Derek gives him for this research and comes up with a very expensive way to destroy some buildings. And it's funny, Derek Powers just says, yeah, well, dynamite's cheaper. And like that, very dismissive of it, but then, manipulates him into saying, but you can become a hitman, basically. Like, yeah, okay, this is not going to be for the purpose that you used it for, but hey, what if we used it for this diabolical purpose? Just evil. What an evil man here we have. And that him getting his comeuppance at the very end as Bruce, they end that episode with a shareholders meeting of Wayne Powers, where they vote down Derek Powers' motion to purchase this land and demolish old Gotham that Bruce is trying to save. And and him getting his tail handed to him and having to walk away with his tail between his legs is pretty satisfying, especially as this is sort of the last interaction that we see between him and Bruce butting heads and until we get to our final episode. And Shriek, by the way, we gave scores of 34 and 32 out of 40 respectfully for that one. So check out episode 29 for that one, and then fast forward all the way to his final appearance, Liam, because we get several episodes that don't really feature him. Maybe a mention here or there, but his final appearance in the entire series would be the episode we covered in episode 66, which was the episode titled Ascension. And this is really introducing his son and sort of introducing Paxton Powers as a character that could possibly take his place. And we really get his identity exposed, and that's sort of the entire episode at that point. Is Derek Powers is revealed to be Blight, and Batman sort of coming to terms with that and having one last final battle with this sad boy that eats sandwiches on submarines.
I mean, yeah, if we're talking about the true highlight of Blight in the entire series, it's when he eats the sandwich. But yeah, that is sort of its finale. I've always, and we talked about it certainly back in the episode when we reviewed it fully, but as a finale for the character, I think it's a really exciting first part there where he sort of reveals, where he's sort of, angered to such a degree that he can't contain the radiation. His skin begins to fall off. Seemingly, Paxton is doing everything he can to contain it, but obviously we later find out in the episode that Paxton this was all an elaborate ploy by him to expose his father and sort of take power in the company, no pun intended. But yeah, it is sort of this dramatic reveal, and Batman swoops in right as Blight is about to kill Bruce Wayne, it appears, and they have a brief fight before Blight gets away, and then yes, we kind of come to this finale in this nuclear submarine where he's hiding out, and it seems at first that Paxton and Batman are working together to capture him, but at the same time, it turns out that Paxton doesn't plan on letting Derek off of the sub alive, and so Batman sort of is left with this conundrum where he has to sort of save the man who killed his father. But despite keeping Paxton from killing Blight, Blight has sort of lost it completely and sets off a chain reaction of explosions where the sub is going down and blowing up, and Batman is able to escape. Paxton and the other thugs on the ship are able to get away, but that is the end. We obviously never see a body, but there's no real follow-up to it. So for all intents and purposes, unless we get some sort of follow-up in a future animated series or movie revival of some sort, this is the end. It's he blows up in a submarine and floats to the bottom of the ocean.
Terry, what's going on in there? The radiation is off the scale.
I think Powers is going critical. I've got to do something.
Get out, now!
Yeah, and I that disappointment and that sort of lack of having a real finality to the storyline that left you feeling sort of satisfied. If you're comparing it to a Peter Parker versus Norman Osborn type story arc, you don't get the sad reality that he's sort of killed by his own glider, like in the Spider-Man movie, or his insanity leads to his own death, or Spider-Man just isn't able to save him in time, but it's his own it's zone, you know that there's finality there. So it's almost as if the creators left it open in case they wanted to bring him back. But I also, read that Robert Goodman, one of the writers on the series, really felt like that this was the finale, that they didn't want to bring him back for any further storylines, that this was sort of a satisfactory end. So I disagree with him personally on that. This doesn't feel very satisfying to me when you watch it. It seems very anticlimactic at points, and our scores ended up being the lowest of all of the Blight episodes for this one. I gave it 22 and you gave it a 24 out of 40. So we did not love that episode, but you can check out our review on episode 66 in the archives at DCAUreview.com. There is, Liam, and we've talked about this and where this falls into continuity and when we start talking about tie-in comics, especially some of those comics that were directly, featured the Warner Brothers Kids WB logo on them. And, as seen on Kids WB, things that were meant to be tie-ins to the comics, but a lot of times that creators themselves didn't reference, didn't pay attention to, or weren't consulted on as they were written. There are 2 appearances that Blight makes, one in Batman Beyond Volume 1, number 3. It's a story called Never Mix, Never Worry. That's sort of sandwiched in between or just after the Rebirth adaptation done in the first 2 issues of that series. And then we do kind of get what ultimately is to me, a little bit more of a satisfactory ending for the character. Not much, but at least a clear, defined ending for the character in Batman Beyond Volume 2, number 18. It's actually features Stalker, who we just covered in last week's episode, and features him, and it also features Blight as well. It's a story called Prey or Hunter or Prey, and it deals with Blight being completely an amnesiac, not remembering anything except that Batman is sort of responsible for him and responsible for his for what he's become, and Stalker is sort of hunting him as well. And there's lots of play back and forth. Definitely recommend if you have one of the comics apps, or maybe the DC Universe app, a wonderful app, by the way.
Sure is.
You could check out that comic on there, read it for free, or maybe, if you happen to stumble upon it in the back issues at your local comic shop, pick it up. It's an interesting story, and that one has more of a finality to it, as Blight is sort of encased in this molten lead and ultimately pronounced dead at that point, a part of the Stalker's collection at that point. But that's sort of all that we get as far as DCAU stuff when it comes to Derek Powers himself and Blight. So it's an arc that starts out with a lot of promise, and I think there are definitely, as we've talked about, a lot of impactful points, especially in that first season of Batman Beyond, stuff that you would ripple out also and certainly feel throughout the entire series. So I think for that reason, it's inarguable, and we've kind of already established it, but that's why Derek Powers and Blight is such an important character, is because those episodes, even though it's only a handful of episodes that he's in, he's a pretty big deal in a lot of these early episodes that really shape and affect who Terry is and who he is as Batman.
Yeah, it's interesting, and certainly, as you said, Mr. Goodman, who wrote that final episode, sort of saw a finality to this, and that it was time to wrap the character up. And we've talked about that certainly quite a few times, and we've referenced it, that there was sort of a directive to move the show into the high school more, and maybe they felt that with that direction there wasn't much of a place for this sort of corporate intrigue with this character. But yeah, regardless, when I think of Blight, I think of, yes, while he may be in our minds maybe the arch enemy of Terry, of Batman in the world of Batman Beyond, it does feel a little bit of a missed opportunity. And again, I don't think there's a problem with having finality, with having a character killed off, or with curing them of the disease or taking away their powers and sending them to jail, whatever you want to do. I don't think there's a problem with that. I don't think every character needs to always be coming back forever, but it just felt like such an open-ended finale that we got in the show. And as you said, there's a tiny bit of follow-up in the tie-in comics, but yeah, we didn't really ever get like that satisfying final fight. And I think that's also part of it, is they're in this sort of cramped submarine area, and Blight is in a net, and and Terry is sort of, and there isn't really even a moment where Terry thinks about whether he wants to save Blight or whether he's going to let him die. So it's not even like a big, hero moment for Terry when he decides he's going to save his father's killer. So yeah, I think what I think of is a great design, as we've talked about, a cool character, deeply integral and important to the origins of the character and the first season of the show. But definitely feels like there was still some juice left. There was still some gas in the tank, so to speak, before we, despite the fact that we sort of said goodbye to Mr. Powers, at least in the main DCAU continuity at that point.
That's right. And as you mentioned there, he has been brought into standard continuity for the DC comics. There have been several volumes, different iterations of Batman Beyond, some of which seem like a bit of a continuation of DCAU continuity, not directly tied in, some major differences, some artistic liberties here and there when it comes to certain things, but follows a similar path. And he was actually a big part of the reintroduction of Future's End. There was a big storyline that involved Derek Powers and him. He wasn't the corporate businessman running Wayne Powers that he was in the DCAU, but he was still a scientist, I believe, and the storyline ultimately leads to him discovering and figuring out that the Bat Cave is under Wayne Manor, that Terry is Batman, that Bruce was the old Batman, and at this point, some of their other characters involved. Matt McGinnis is also serving on the Bat team, and we get, I believe, Dick Grayson's daughter is also in one of the heroes as well. So yeah, we have a lot of different characters that weren't necessarily explored in the DCAU, but I think it's cool, and it's a testimony, I think, to the character, not only how the character looks, but the backstory to the character, his powers, all of that, powers pun intended, but his abilities, if you will, all of that, to then have that adapted into the standard DC continuity means they did something right, because there's some meat on the bone there for writers to use.
Yeah, absolutely. That sort of Future's End rebirth run of Batman Beyond, which was sort of all written by Dan Jurgens, and then had a lot of different really talented artists. Sean Chen did most of the Blight arc. But it did an interesting thing where it sort of melded a lot of elements, a lot of the returning characters like Curare and Blight and the Jokers and some of those elements of the animated series, but also tied in Damian Wayne and some of the more modern main DC Comics elements to the series. So it sort of jumped around to different things. But yeah, I like the idea of reintroducing Blight, especially because, like we've been talking about, we didn't really get a satisfactory finale to where we get that knockdown, drag out fight between Batman and Blight. But yeah, I think that's a character that there is still meat on the bone there. Whether it is, like I said, if someday there is a new animated series, if there's a live action Batman Beyond movie made someday, I think this is a character that still has a lot of room to be molded and sort of added into that Batman mythos. And yeah, it's cool to see where he's popped up in the comics since his debut, but definitely feels like there's still quite a bit that could be done with this character going forward.
Absolutely. And yeah, some of the things that we cover here, definitely if you have the opportunity, just encourage, we love comic books, obviously main DC continuity, DCAU stuff. So just encouragement, if you haven't thought about picking some of that stuff up, or maybe you want just a little bit of extra Batman Beyond story or some Blight, you can check out that old Future's End run. It's only about a year old or so, a little older, I think, was when the finale came out. So it's not that old. So you can probably find it in your back issues at your comic shop, or check it out on one of the digital apps. But some good stuff there to certainly enjoy, some beautiful artwork. Liam, we talk about, usually break down our episodes, and we've talked about visuals and ultimately the plot of Blight. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about some music here. That there isn't quite a Blight theme that I recall. Nothing that stands out as a definitive Blight soundtrack, something that you can put your finger on and go, oh yeah, that's the Blight theme right there. But I think I think that as we've learned in covering the episodes of Batman Beyond that we've done so far, that there's always going to be musical moments that occur with characters, and I was able to maybe pinpoint one or two. I think Meltdown, I think, is a great showcase, that final battle and ultimately the initial reveal of Blight as a character. This is the first time Batman has really seen him, if you recall, and then you have you have Mr. Freeze happening at the same time, and it's the three of them, and Batman sort of interacting with them, and Bruce is on the radio talking to Terry, not really, doesn't have the visuals on, so he's just kind of experiencing what's happening with the suit. And so there's a lot of great musical moments there. Did you have anything that stood out for you from your recollection of musical moments when it came to Blight?
Definitely the Meltdown fight. I think from the moment when Batman asks him his name and he says Blight will do it, the theme sort of really ramps up. It's really heavy drums and guitar, as you might expect from Batman Beyond, but it really sort of ramps up there in a way that it feels like final boss music or boss fight music. I think it's a really like, all right, now it's on, now there's trouble here. And I think that's a pretty fun, really fast paced scene there. It's pretty tremendous. And then yeah, I think it's very simple. In fact, it might almost be like single notes, but the scene, the reveal of Blight at the end of Rebirth Part 2, as you talked about, he sort of looks in the mirror, sees it, and starts to laugh maniacally. And there's sort of these single notes, and it's almost like the Christopher Nolan sound, the Inception sound, single boom, like and then that sort of slow pan where he turns around and is almost looking into the camera as he's laughing maniacally.
The good news is the radiation seems to have completely eradicated the virus.
What's the bad news?
As you know, the mutational properties of the virus can be corrupted by its environment.
Bottom line it, Doctor.
Kill the radiation, please.
And there's sort of this it just has this real horror movie vibe to it, and just hitting these really sort of loud but simple notes as he sort of slowly gives into his madness in that final scene. I thought the music there always stood out, and then yeah, the final little bit of music we get when he's sort of going nuclear in the sub. There's again some pretty good traditional Batman Beyond action music there, but yeah, it doesn't necessarily have the flavor of some of our classic villain themes that we like to talk about, or even some of the unique musical stylings that we see in Batman Beyond when a character like Curare or the Stalker is involved. Doesn't really have as you said, a unique theme that particularly stands out for him, but yeah, there's certainly some musical moments that I associate with him, no doubt about that.
Absolutely. I think it's time we talk about the gentleman that brought our character to life, and that being Mr. Sherman Howard.
That's right. So DCAU fans like us may know this, but I'll pass along this trivia note. Mr. Howard was in the running to play Lex Luthor on Superman the Animated Series, and could very well have gotten that role if it weren't for Clancy Brown coming in and just killing it, and becoming a definitive version of that character in any medium. But I think that was sort of one of those characters where you had him in the back of your mind. You liked his performance. He was used a few other times on Superman. He plays the Collector in the two-part episode, The Main Man, with, of course, Superman and Lobo, and then also voices Steppenwolf in Apocalypse Now. So he was used a couple of times in other animated series, even though he didn't necessarily land the recurring role at that point. But that sort of changed when they were looking for a Norman Osborn, Lex Luthor type for Batman Beyond. They of course remembered Andre Armano, Bruce Timm. Talk about that, I believe, on some of the commentary tracks and things that you could find on the Blu-rays. That he was still very much on their mind, and so when they had a similar character, they thought he would be perfect for it, and he really does. I think he's better as the slimy corporate guy than he is as the more over-the-top maniacal villain for me. Yeah. But there's certainly some very memorable moments in his vocal performances.
No, absolutely. I think his voice is much more suited for me when it comes to it pairs. I'd say it probably pairs better as the Derek Powers character as opposed to the Blight character. I almost, rewatching some of these episodes more recently in preparation for this episode, you wonder almost why, with the type of character that Blight was, why they didn't choose to do a little bit of a voice distortion for the character. Just visually, what he looks like, even if just some slight reverb or a deepening of the voice when he's sort of as that persona could have made that character feel a little bit more menacing. When it's this sort of snarly, seedy businessman voice coming out of this such a visually striking character, it sort of is a little bit of a mismatch. Again, we've complained when it's been the opposite, though, that sometimes they went too heavy on reverb and too heavy on voice effects. So, I think it's better that they went this route as opposed to being too distracting or too different than his standard voice. But yeah, it definitely fits that businessman. His clashes with Bruce Wayne and even some of his interactions with Terry, where he isn't afraid to sort of twist the knife at times and really sort of needle Terry. There's a specific interaction that they have in the Shriek episode where he mentions that, Terry says that he's going to take over Bruce's finances for him. And he says, aren't you a little young to be doing that? And then, there's another interaction that they have when he realizes that Terry's working for Bruce, and he says, yeah, well, I guess you have to be the breadwinner now. It's just such very subtle twisting of the knife to Terry, but so seedy and underhanded, but doing it with a smile on his face I think it's great. It's great. And I think his performances as Derek Powers really stand out for those sort of subtly evil twists.
Yeah. And we talked about that, the very personal rivalry that it becomes. And that sort of, yes, every time he and Terry have an interaction, whether it's in that scene, whether it's in when Terry interacts with Derek in the psych ward in Shriek, when he's trying to figure out what happened to Bruce, and Terry actually tries to physically attack him at one point after Derek Powers is sort of intimating that Bruce will not recover from this latest episode, and also makes mention to Terry that there's always room for one more in the psych ward before walking away. It's just...
What happened? Is he all right?
He's in the psych ward. He started hearing voices.
Voices? Age can do tragic things to a person. But I wouldn't worry about it. He's going to be in the best of hands. Mine. Who else can take care of his affairs? He has no wife, no children.
Me. I could do it.
Awfully young, aren't you?
Awfully slimy, aren't you?
Careful. The courts are very strict about slander.
Yeah? Well, let's see how they handle assault.
You should know something about the psych ward here. There's always room for one more.
Those moments of where he's a little bit more understated and more subtly villainous, I think, are what stand out to me as far as Mr. Howard's performance. But yeah, that's without a doubt that is an iconic performance by him, and by association, because Blight has appeared in very little other medium. He is, as to date, the only person who has voiced this character. So that is that he stands alone, at least as of the time of recording here.
That's right. So I think it's a case of, we're pretty happy with the voice casting, and I think it fits the character well. And as you said, not that we have anything to compare it to, but a solid job, and certainly makes sense why this would be the defining voice for this character moving forward. But Liam, I think wrapping things up here, I think long-term thinking about this character and some of the impact that it's had outside of this story arc, he has had some small appearances in different merchandise. You and I are both action figure collectors, and we've talked a lot about the injustice that was served to this extremely toyetic character that deserved a proper action figure, and really only has a few representations when it comes to collecting, and that for collectors to choose from. Nothing that's truly representative of his actual appearance on the show too. It's a miscarriage of justice.
Yeah, we have very few things to pick from. We have a Kenner / Hasbro toy that says it's Blight on the box, but does not look much like the character that we saw on television. He also had actually, quite frankly, much more accurate representation in a Burger King Happy Meal toy, although the sort of Derek Powers cover that like that character, but we'll take it for the more accurate Blight at the very least,
for sure.
But yeah, other than a minor little Kubrick sort of quasi Lego type toy, it was pretty much slim pickings for Blight representation in action figures until just this year, when we are as we speak, I believe, where the Blight McFarlane Toys figure that is again based on the Rebirth / Futures End Batman Beyond comic book look, and not the TV series look, will be coming to stores, or may also already be in some stores across the U.S. here. But man, yeah, it's all these years and how impactful he sort of feels to this series. It's slim pickings when it comes to Blight appearances in merchandise.
Yeah, so hopefully, there was this sort of shady, or not shady, but sort of illusion and not really completely fleshed out announcement about McFarlane taking over the DC Direct license and doing some DC Direct stuff that was announced a couple of probably a month or two ago now. So who knows what the future holds for that. Maybe crossing our fingers, toes, and arms and legs, we can get them to perhaps produce a Batman Beyond TV accurate or show accurate series of figures. Even a 3 or 4 figure series would be great to go as a companion to those DC Direct DCAU figures that they've produced over the last several years, because this is a character that looks amazing, and even in that suit and slacks and jacket, I think that it's such a very visually appetizing character that it would fit right next to your Batman Beyond on your shelf. So the fact that we don't really have many options to suppose a screen accurate or a show accurate Blight with your Terry McGinnis figure is, again, a miscarriage of justice and a long overdue. So crossing our fingers that is remedied at some point in the near future. But overall, Liam, I think it's safe to say we could probably come up with a favorite moment or so for this character. I think mine is probably going to have to be that meltdown. I think that reveal, the initial interaction with Batman, you have the whole Mr. Freeze stuff going on, the interaction between Mr. Freeze and Blight, the characters on the two ends of the spectrum when it comes to their powers, heat versus cold, fire versus ice. And then you throw Batman in the mix is probably my favorite moment of the series. What about you? What's your favorite Blight moment that we covered?
Yeah, I mean, Meltdown's really hard to beat. For the sake of being a little bit different, I will just mention, I think the initial, those last few minutes of Rebirth, from when he tries to throw the gas, where Terry throws the gas canister at him and he's exposed. As you said, it's sort of a mystery what happens to him until those last few minutes. That reveal, as we've just talked about in there, is, I think it does stand out for me as probably the other iconic Blight moment, where he's sort of under this light which projects him as looking very normal, and he demands they shut the light off, and as soon as the light goes away, you see that green glowing skeleton, and as I said, that sort of horror movie to be continued ending that episode has. That's probably the other standout Blight moment for me, as well as Meltdown.
Well, Liam, that will bring an end to our initial DCAU character spotlight here, as we have highlighted pretty much all of Blight's run from start to finish in the DCAU. We would love to hear your feedback as listeners. Feel free to tweet us at DCAU Review, or you can slide into those DMs on Instagram at DCAU Review as well, or leave a comment on one of our posts. We love that sweet engagement, regardless of what platform you select. But we'd love to hear your thoughts on where Blight lands in your favorite Batman Beyond characters, maybe your favorite DCAU main villains. Do you feel like he's been robbed of his opportunity to be properly appreciated in action figure form? Give us your thoughts and let us know what you think about this new format. It's not something that we're going to be doing every single week, so you don't have to worry about that if you love our normal format, but it's something that we're looking to throw in here and there, as we said, sort of talk about some of these characters that are very popular, but we've left long ago. We talked about, Liam, that so many of these episodes were in the first 30 episodes that we covered, and we're on episode 173 this week. So lots of time and weeks in between the last time we talked about Derek Powers and Blight. So I love the opportunity to talk with you, and hopefully the fans did too, about this character that's so important to Batman Beyond during our Batman Beyond month.
Yeah, definitely want to hear feedback on this. Both if you liked this format that we went with, if you have suggestions on how we could tweak it, we'd love to hear those. And of course, obviously, we'd like to hear other characters you would like to hear in this DCAU character spotlight series. So definitely reach out to us at DCAU Review on Twitter and on Instagram. Let us know what you liked, what you didn't like, and who you'd like to see us tackle next.
That's right. And speaking of next, Liam, this is the last Saturday in the month of August. So that means we are suddenly turning the calendar page once again. Time marches forward. That is how time works, I suppose. So as we move into the month of September, that means we have a new theme or series for the month. So why don't we talk a little bit about what we'll be doing for the month of September?
Yeah, so we have done a similar thing once or twice before. We usually do one a year, but we're actually doing it a little bit later this year. We are going to be looking at a month of Elseworlds review coming up in September. And this time, rather than focusing on a single character, previously we did an Elseworlds Superman month, as well as an Elseworlds Batman month. We're going to be looking at Elseworlds Villains month. So we'll be jumping around to several different series and looking at different classic DC Comics villains in their animated forms, but not in the traditional DCAU, in some of the other various animated shows that we have covered in the past, and maybe some we haven't. So looking forward to tackling those characters in a new light throughout the month of September.
It's going to be a blast. You will not want to miss it. And make sure you don't miss it by subscribing to us on your favorite podcast app, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio. We are an Anchor platformed podcast, so you can listen to us directly on anchor.fm. Also, don't forget, we've worked very, very hard, and with the support of our friends at Watchtower Database, we are a part of the Pod Tower Network on YouTube. So if you consume your podcasts via YouTube, go ahead and search for Pod Tower in the search bar. We'll come up there. You can do us a favor, subscribe to that channel. That helps us out. We're looking to get our subscribership up on that website. So even if you don't listen to our podcast there and you want to support us, lend us a hand, do a subscribe on the Pod Tower channel. And not only do you get content from us, but you get some great content, some additional podcasts from the Watchtower Database, as well as our friends at Tim Talk, who have also done a almost full review of the entire DCAU. So check them out as well. Don't forget, you can also buy yourself a t-shirt if you're feeling really, really generous over at DCAUreview.com. You can head to the store tab and pick yourself up a shirt or a hat. If you want to send a few dollars our way, we would definitely appreciate that. And thank you. If not, you can also leave us a review on your favorite podcast app, and that helps us out immensely as well. Looking forward to kicking off Elseworlds Villains Month starting next week. But until then, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we will talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye-bye.